everybody. Welcome to the Passion Creative Podcast. My name is Brett Younker, and we are so excited to be gathering creatives from all areas of the church: production, worship leading, design, leadership. We're so glad that you're here with us, and I am so glad that we have our pastor, Louie Giglio, in the house today.
Come on.
Louie, we're so glad that you're here. How are you doing today?
Amazing day so far, and this is the highlight.
That's amazing. It's my highlight as well. And Louie, I'm so excited to jump into this because there's a lot of creative facets in the church. Obviously, there's a lot of different teams and disciplines and all of that. But a lot of people maybe listening to this or watching this would know you as an amazing preacher, communicator, the visionary of the Passion Movement. You're an author, just got a new book, At the Table with Jesus. Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks so much.
And you're a songwriter. There's so many facets to what you put your hands on every single day, but a lot of that in this last season of ministry for you has come up underneath or really out of being the pastor of Passion City Church. And I think it would be really cool just to kind of start our time talking about pastoring and leadership and creativity. Could you take us back to that moment where God called you and Shelly to start Passion City Church? Why did you want to become a pastor? How did you know that God wanted you to be a pastor?
Man, that's a podcast.
I know, that's a series. It's a spinoff.
We might want to spin that off into the How Do We Make This Step podcast. But it's awesome being on with you, and I think it's great to give context just for a second that you just stepped out of a songwriting session to help steer this podcast today. So in our house at Passion City location in Atlanta, there are some of the leading songwriters in America, and they're collaborating with some of the top songwriters in our house, and you guys have been writing for a couple days, just asking God for new songs. So we got creativity going.
it's all around us
in real time right now. Passion it wasn't an accident to God, but it certainly wasn't on Shelly and I's radar. We were just local college ministry leaders, loving life. But through a series of personal events with my family, my dad's illness, we ended up in Atlanta, Georgia, and my dad ended up dying. And Passion was born. That's a story in and of itself. And that was what we thought God's assignment was for our life, to shepherd this movement, to gather students, to point people to Jesus. And then out of that came music, and out of that came a label, and out of that came more events, and soon a DNA was formed, like a spiritual DNA of rich theology, worship, our own spiritual practices in following Jesus. But yet we didn't have a home.
Right.
So we went to church every Sunday like everybody else. And I loved our church, by the way. It's one of the most influential churches in our generation.
For sure.
And I loved our pastor. He was my best friend growing up. But the DNA of that church and the DNA of Passion were very different. Same Jesus, same gospel, same desire to see impact in the world, but different DNA. So that was one of the factors. And I started wondering, is it possible that we could have a home? Like where every day we gather together with people in a community of faith that has the same expression of Passion Global. And it didn't seem very likely. I was 50. You don't plant churches when you're 50. A guy told me when I was 28 I would never be a good local pastor.
Wow.
And I received that. I was like, okay. And so God had to unwind that. He had to peel all the layers off that. And about 45 years of age, he started doing that. He started peeling the layers off, Brett. And it took him a minute to peel all those layers off. Footnote, if somebody wants to speak something over your life on behalf of God, you got to be really careful.
That's so good.
About what filters you allow that to come through. And eventually God peeled the layers off and it was like, I want you to be a pastor. I want there to be a local expression of Passion. I want there to be a local community with the DNA of the 268 generation, and I was down. And I'll never forget the Sunday sitting at church and really knowing today's the day.
Wow.
This is the day. This is now. And went for a walk after church with Shelly and talked to her, said, babe, I think today's the day. And she said, nope, today is not the day.
Yes.
And Shelly was running our record label, as she still is, managing artists. She had contracts that she'd committed to years into the future. Shelly's a finisher. I'm a starter. She knew that if I started a church, she would have to finish it. And she just said, no, we're not taking that on right now. Wow. We argued for about an hour.
Okay.
As I would run a lap and come back with my...
Me and Ansley like to call them spirited discussions.
Yes, we had a few spirited discussions. Yeah. I would run a lap while she was walking, and in my running of the lap, I would refine my argument. And I'm a pretty good, arguer. So I'd refine my argument, come back around, present, no. Take another lap, refine, present, no. Another lap. And then finally, I took a lap, Brad, and I said to the Lord... and this isn't meaning that I hear from God and Shelly doesn't. Shelly's brilliant. But I just said, God, why am I trying to talk Shelly into doing this? If you're calling us to do this, then that's, I say it reverently, that's your job.
Right.
So I said to him on the lap, I said, I'm never mentioning this to Shelly again. So if you want us to plant a church, then that's up to you.
That's incredible. That's a lot of patience and kind of pretty massive open-handedness. If you I feel like I've heard from God. And it seems like you've kind of carried that sense of open-handedness into so many spaces of leadership. What on a week to week or daily level, what do you bring, I'd be interested from your point of view as you come and step in, because now God has started this church and we're over 10 years into this whole thing. I mean, I remember those early days of being in a basement and singing to Jesus and then gathering people, and a few years of trying to figure out who are we, and then God kind of letting us know who we are, and just seeing it grow to these multiple locations in Atlanta, a location in DC. So now, all these years later, as you step in to lead as a lead pastor, what are you coming into work each day going, this is what I'm bringing to in a way to serve our team and our church?
Well, I mean, just to kind of tie back up onto the end of that, it's similar to today. I was 50. I was more like 48, 9, close to 50 when we were having the spirited discussion at the middle school that day. So I wasn't a 26-year-old kid just out of seminary going, I'm going to go plant a church.
Right.
Something wrong with that. I mean, in fact, I wish in some ways I had done that.
Yeah.
But I was 50 years old. And we had been tracking with God with passion for decades. And over a decade. And so I knew two things. I knew, number one, that this would only work if Shelly and I were both called to it.
Yep.
And that I needed God to make that clear, because planning a church is as when I finally sat down with Andy after Shelly and I came to the moment, we a few weeks went by, 2 months went by, no conversation about the church. We ended up at a conference sitting on the front row. I was speaking at, another pastor was speaking. At the end of his talk, he said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I feel led of God right now to pray for pastors' wives.
Okay.
And if you're a pastor's wife, I want to invite you to come down to the front. Now, we were in a basketball arena, so coming down to the front took a while. And maybe 100 women came down. And at the very end, before he started praying, Shelly, we were already at the front because we were sitting on the front row, middle. Yes. But Shelly took 2 steps.
Wow.
And joined the prayer.
Wow.
And this pastor, Brett, there were 5 things that we were stuck on.
Okay.
He prayed every one of the 5 things in his prayer, specifically.
Okay.
And when he said amen, Shelly turned around. I sobbed, she sobbed, and we walked up to the green room, the speaker's lounge, went way in the back in a corner, and this has never happened before or since in our lives. And we sat in the corner for the 25, 30-minute break between the 2 sessions of the morning. We didn't say a word. We just looked at each other and just shook our heads like, that really just happened.
Right.
And so when we got into planting, I went to lunch with Andy one day, and I said, hey, I know this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but I wanted to tell you before anyone else that the Lord's put it on our heart to plant a church, and Shelley and I are going to plant a church here in Atlanta. And Andy looked at me, and he just said, are you sure? And I was like, wow, I feel so encouraged. And I've told this story a lot, and he's probably heard it. But, thanks for all the encouragement. And then he went a step further. He said, Louie, it'll be the hardest thing you've ever done. And I was naive. Even though I was 50, I had the same naivety, however you say that word,
yes,
that all church planners have. Like, we're not going to be that church. We'll be, impervious to struggle and strife and gossip.
Everyone will
and
get along.
backstabbing, and no one will ever leave our church. People will only come to our church.
Totally.
And I had all that in my mind, and because we had a family that we were planning with, and we had some history, but he said, it'll be the hardest thing you've ever done, and he was right.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad for that moment that we had together at that arena.
Yeah, right.
Because this isn't something that we just casually, drifted into.
Right.
But God made it very clear that he wanted us to do this. And I was riding in a car, maybe on the same trip, and sharing with a friend of mine in this other country. I said, hey, we're going to plant a church by God's grace. He said, of course you are. Passion Church. And that seems obvious now,
right? But
I didn't know what we would call our church. And he just said, of course you are. Passion Church. And I went, yes, that's what we're going to do. So God just helped us clarify. And then when I come to work, to come back to your question every day, it's really very similar, Brett. It's I asked John Maxwell a few months ago. I had never met him.
Okay.
And John Maxwell, if you don't know, just notice the bookstore next time you're in the airport.
If you're ever in the leadership
you'll see
section.
100 books by John Maxwell on leadership. And I had a moment to interact with him, and I don't hardly ever do this. But I walked up to him. He was about to speak, and I said, I just wanted to say hello. And he was like, oh, Louie, it's so good to meet you. And then I said, can I ask you a question? So I think he's 74, I think.
Okay.
I said, you're 74 years old. What's the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning? I don't know why. I don't normally bother people. And he said, I wake up, I go to my study, and I open my Bible. I read my Bible. And he said, Louie, and then I ask this question. What can I do today to serve somebody?
Oh, I love that.
And improve their life?
That's great.
And that's kind of become my mantra since that moment.
I love that.
So I woke up today, and I have a very full day today, but I woke up today and said, Lord, help me see what I can do today to serve someone, encourage someone, help someone, improve. Oh, no. Here's how he said it. Sorry, John. He said, I asked the question, what can I do to add value to someone else's life today?
I love that.
And so that's kind of, for me, the starting point for the day. And then it's a tug of war between what do I have to do and what do I really feel like I want to do and need to do.
Right. Even still, though, I like in that question because it's that same spirit that I feel like you have in that story with Shelley of open-handedness, of just coming to work. Obviously, you have things and you bring vision to our team and our organization and all of that. But it really is. I mean, if you're coming in saying, how can I add value? It's more of this than going like, well, let me kind of get all of that here. Just to think about the Passion Creative community, and that there's a lot of creative people on church staffs and this, that, the other. But you're a lead pastor at a church that values creativity, and there's a lot of lead pastors that are out here that I've traveled around a lot and I've been in a lot of churches, and you're like, I don't know if there's a big creative team here or not, and a lot of times the lead pastor could just be like, okay, the musicians and the production, the designers, I don't even know what they do, why do we pay them? Why are they getting paid? There is that kind of a distance sometimes, but somehow you've stepped not just towards the creatives, but you're our lead creative. And so could you just speak to that as a lead pastor, that you're why is that so valuable to what the work that God's called us to do?
Well, such a great question, Brett. And I think you and I have both seen a lot of churches in our life. And I know for me, one of the things we say, it's in one of our core values here at Passion City, is that people see us before they hear us.
That's great.
And I think most pastors, so your question was kind of directed a little bit towards pastors. Most pastors preach, so they're interested in speaking.
Right.
So their week is probably orbiting around the sermon.
Yep. There's a lot of these sitting right on their desk.
There's some, well, there might not be a lot of these because these are kind of creative and cool books.
Yeah,
that's the history of art right there.
Okay.
But they got some commentaries, and this is my study day, and I've got a message I got to preach this Sunday.
They got logos everywhere.
And it's all about the speaking, and I get it. That's what I do. That's my primary function in the church, I believe. But people don't hear me first. They see me first.
Wow.
When they pull in the parking lot, they're already evaluating the gospel. Not just this church, these people, but they're evaluating what they're going to hear today. Is God valid? And I'll never forget, because our building here is very kind of Apple-esque, and a young hip-hop producer, which would not be uncommon in Atlanta, walked in our door and said to me later, I hadn't stepped 15 feet inside the door that I knew this was my home. I was like, you hadn't heard a sermon.
Right.
You hadn't heard a song. You didn't know what our theology was. But the church spoke to you. How did it do that? It spoke through creativity.
Wow.
And I also, 100% believe that we're representing someone whose name is Creator.
Wow, that's great.
That's who God is. He is the Creator, big C Creator. And so if He is the Creator, then we have to reflect that it's more than good eschatology, soteriology, theology, bibliology. We have to reflect that, hey, there's a God in heaven,
right,
who organized and ideated this cosmos that we're in. And I want to reflect that in every way we can. In fact, this whole little setup right now was put together by our team, and it's amazing.
Right.
And we're doing a creative podcast. And I'm just looking around at all the intentionality and how amazing this thing is right here that I'd never seen before, that shines down on the floor. And I'm guessing creatives who are seeing or listening to this.
BTS right there.
Yeah, they know how that works. But you don't have to be a creative to value creativity.
That's great.
And that's where the breakdown comes, because a lot of my friends they're actually better preachers than me. They're better sermon writers than me. They really excel in that gift, but they don't have many other gifts. That's kind of like their lane. That's their thing.
Right.
And I'm an okay preacher, but I want to be, I'm a chip off the old block, and my dad was an artist.
Yes.
And a really good one. And I grew up appreciating the art my dad brought home. I still have my dad's abstract art hanging in our house.
That's so cool.
And so I'd go on a weekend when my dad was working on a project over the weekend and smell the markers and I don't know, it's in my DNA. And I'm not a good artist, but I do respect it, and I respect creativity. So that's why our house is always going to be leading with creativity.
I love that. You were talking about sermons and preaching, and I think there's that art. I mean, I've led a lot of music in my life and written songs, and then in recent years trying to piece together messages. And to me, it's exciting because it's a whole new art, and it's a whole new thing. And I kind of personally think it's an area of art that we don't lump it in with the creatives, but it truly is. It's hard to do, to bring people through a journey and to communicate a message in half an hour or 45 minutes to 50 minutes, wherever you may be. But for you, could you help us, could you give us a little window into the process? You've been speaking weekly to a community of faith for for a long, long time. What does your process look like to prepare to give a message?
Wow, that's another podcast.
I know.
Too.
What we're doing
is
we are
more.
laying out the season 1 of Your and I's behind the scenes podcast.
Well, I'm working on a talk right now, literally right now.
Okay.
As we're talking, I am in the midst of working on a message for Sunday, inviting people into the invitation to walk with God.
That's awesome.
And I'm going to be preaching about Enoch from Hebrews 11, where we've been for a few weeks as a church, but we're switching from by faith to at the table, but I'm pulling out another character from that chapter. And so for me, it starts with an idea, and this is the rough sketch of it. It starts with an idea like, what does God want to say right now? Secondly, what part of his word do we want to anchor that in?
Wow.
Third, how can we make this as memorable as possible?
Okay.
And fourthly, how can I sing this message as more than say this message?
Okay.
That's a cool question. So I kind of drift down that lane, and I could be at any part of it at any point. Right now, I'm in the textual part.
Okay.
Because I've never really dived too deep into the Old Testament word origin of walk. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time doing that today. If I want to understand what it says, and this is the one thing God requires of you, is walk humbly with God. What does that Old Testament word walk imply? What's the root of it? What's the etymology of it? Because is there anything in there that will help me bring that to light more and therefore make it more memorable to people? I'm not trying to eisegete, which is when you try to make a text say what you want it to say. And a lot of us do that. I try not to do it. I'm trying to exegete, which is pull the text apart and let what's in there come out. Right. That's our job. But at the same time, Brett, I don't want to just transfer information on Sunday. Right. I could just print that out on a handout and give it to people. Right. I want to deliver it in a way so if you lead right before me, you're leading worship. I want to go right behind you and preach worship. Right. And I view what I'm doing as much worship as you view what you're doing as worship, because we're both glorifying God by putting words in people's mouths or putting the word in people's mouths. But at the end of the day, people, the sad reality is people forget 95% of what they hear within 24 hours of hearing it. Wow. So if I ask the average person at our church, what did I preach on last time I preached, they would be able to possibly say Abraham and Isaac. If I said, tell me four more things about that message, people would start to struggle. And so really at the end of the day, what I've learned is you really get to say one thing per shot. Okay. And what is the one thing you want people to walk away with? And Andy really taught me this early. He said, can you write down in one sentence what this message is? Right. And if you can't, then you're not ready to preach the message. You're going to spend 35 minutes trying to land this plane, but you don't even know what the landing strip is at the end of the day. So is it memorable? Is it melodic? Is it worshipful? Is it heart and soul? And is it rooted in the text and filled with Jesus? That's what you're aiming for. And so how do you do that at the end of the day? For me, I don't know. It's like, but I do know this, like Sunday, I'm going to paint a boat. I know that. So there's going to be an ocean, there's going to be a sky, there's going to be clouds, there's going to be a boat. It's a sailboat. It's got 3 masts on it. And there's a little rocky jetty over here. And I'm going to have all my colors and my palette and my brush, and I want to be ready and prepared. And I probably will do what even Michelangelo did. I will sketch a boat on the paper beforehand that you will not be able to see or perceive, but I will go in and sketch out, what I'm going to do. But I don't know for 100% sure if I'm going to paint the sky first or the water first. Okay. But I know I'm not painting a cat. And I think it's that freedom is the difference between reading a manuscript and try to paint a picture in real time.
That's really cool. I love that. I mean, I think that just speaks to, I think anyone who's heard you preach, in some ways they get to experience, also I would say experience the truth. And, I just think about, I know if you've been around Passion City for a long time. Like you're at summer camp with a guy in a bear suit or a live bear on stage and talking about being looking like a believer in Jesus on the outside, but actually being one. And like that picture, I can't get out of my mind. And so it's cool to kind of hear how you're processing that as a preacher and a leader. If I can ask one more leadership question for our time, because just particularly with you sitting in a lead pastor role, leading a lot of creatives, you are raising up people and releasing them into their God-given things. And obviously in raising them up, you want them to value the things that you value, that our church is valuing. And then as they do, that you want to release them into their God-given ability. And I'm sure that's obviously a leadership tension, right? It's not we've referenced Andy a lot. It's not the problem to solve, it's a tension to manage. But how do you do that? How do you process that with the teams that you're leading and the creatives, you help sharpen their visions, but yet kind of help them move in a way that is like, so that we're all moving together?
Yeah. Well, that's such an important question, and I feel like I don't know how to distill the answer to that. It's a little bit more of a leading by intuition, but I think it helps if you have been in a few of those different spheres and circles. And I think a good example would be Ben Stewart on our team. Ben is a phenomenal Bible teaching preacher, but he preaches completely different than me. I did see a comment somewhere where people said that I require all people to wear black who preach, because when you see Grant and Ben and me preaching, we're always wearing black. And it's true, I do make all of our preachers wear black. Not true. But Ben preaches completely different than me, and it's never been my desire to make him preach like me.
Right.
And I couldn't preach like him if I tried. So the beauty of it is that we're very different,
right? But
we're exuding the same values,
right?
And we're operating within the same culture. So I was just in DC on Sunday, and he was preaching, and I was just there, and it felt just like our church.
Right.
It's Passion City Church. No doubt about it. It was a room of our house, just like this is a room of our house. But Ben was functioning in his skin,
right,
and not in my skin.
Right.
And I think if someone comes along and says, I'm going to be Brett Younker, like John Harkey, who was leading on Sunday, who's one of your proteges, is a guy that you raised up, you brought into our house, and you guys are similar. Because he modeled a lot of what he does after you, but he is coming into his own skin now.
Right.
And all you, me, we all just see that and celebrate that. So I don't want different cultures in our house.
Right.
So if some other creative in our team is like, I'm floating in a different value system, I have different language.
Right.
I got different theological leanings and bent. It's like, that's not going to work. There has to be congruency and alignment for us to all go down the freeway without the hubcaps flying off.
Right.
But everyone can have a different color car. And maybe one guy has his hands on the wheel here, one guy's a two-hander, one person likes a stick shift, the other person likes automatic. Those are that's the beauty of diversity. And diversity in alignment is super powerful. And so I think we're doing a good job. I don't know if we're excelling, but I know we're not failing at recognizing the uniqueness of people and not restricting that uniqueness, because we're operating in congruency and alignment of culture and language.
That's awesome.
And theological anchor.
Right.
So it's finding that balance, and I think when you can find it, you're not cloning people.
Right.
You're lifting up people in their uniqueness.
That's awesome.
But at the end of the day, if you listen to all of us long enough, you hear one heartbeat.
That's really cool. That's awesome. Well, just to close today, maybe speak to that lead pastor who's leading a team of a whole team of people who are creatives and even people who would consider themselves just to be people, but just to encourage a lead pastor out there today, what would you say just to leave them with just like a word of encouragement for what they're doing, God's called them to?
Yeah, well, I would just say to anybody that is leading in that pastoral role or leading anybody, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a tough go to try to lead people for this little season, and it's a tough go to lead people, period. And it's very hard to lead creatives.
Mm-hmm.
Creatives, and I can say this because I am one quasi, creatives float different, feel different.
There's a lot of feelings.
You're putting art out in front of people.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that on the regular, you don't understand that's trepidatious. If you do it 100 times, it's still, there's my art, and some people might like it, and some people will like it, and some people won't like it. No one likes all art.
Right.
I mean, the Mona Lisa, but that's only because it's famous. That's not because people go there and go, that I love that painting. It's just because it's iconic, but no one likes all art. And so as an artist, you're always living in the tension of acceptance and rejection.
Right.
No matter how good your art is. So that's a struggle. So I would say to people leading right now as an encouragement, if you are creative, awesome. If you're not, get some creative people around you.
Right.
And good. Don't be nervous about getting in the conversation with them. And what I have found is you either got a guy who can lead a worship song and then put the guitar down and preach like you, or you've got a guy who plays the guitar and then sits in the green room, or you got a pastor who doesn't know one thing about what the creatives are doing. It's like, I'm over here working on my sermon, don't bother me. I think tearing that wall down for every pastor is the most helpful thing that could happen in a church, because the pastor is the lead worshiper of the church, whether he or she wants to be or not.
That's great.
And maybe not the lead creative, but definitely the lead worshiper. And if you're standing on the front row with your hands in your pockets, or rifling through your notes one last time, or checking out what your opening paragraph's going to be, the church is watching you, and they're learning from you. And these people up here trying to lead people to Jesus, and you're down here, totally like checked out. So tear that wall down, get into the uncomfortable space, go to lunch with a worship leader. Worship leader, go to lunch with your pastor.
That's great.
Worship leader, tell your pastor that his sermon spoke to you.
Yep.
Pastor, tell your worship leader that you loved the song they led and how God used it. And try to learn what each other's doing. We have the benefit of, knowing each other for a long, long time, and of knowing a lot about what each other is gifted at. But a lot of people don't. And I just think tearing that wall down is the starting point, because it builds trust and friendship and mutual respect and mutual teamwork. And then we're walking in to lead the house of God as one voice,
I love that.
One people, not y'all lead, and then when you're done leading, I'll lead.
Yes.
And I think that's where
it's powerful.
That's where the power is.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Louie, for being here today and to speaking to this Passion Creative community online. And we love you guys so much. Thank you for joining us and being a part of today. We'll see you next time.